If you're that person that will spend 20K like this without even blinking an eye on something that is marketing or sales or advertising, or God forbid you'll spend 200K on a car, and you won't spend 30, 40, 50 grand on making sure your business is legit and your assets are protected, and I rest my case.
They're happy to buy the private jets and the nice cars and the mansions and all that other stuff. $20,000, $40,000 for compliance review to do this? Are you kidding me?
Nothing got even remotely close to the catastrophic impact of a governmental investigation. That stuff puts pretty much everybody out of business.
If you've got an attorney and they say they're an FTC attorney and they do regulatory issues and compliance issues and they haven't negotiated or resolved concerns through an investigation, or they've litigated the case, they probably don't know the inner workings that they need to.
Welcome back to Don't Say That. All right, today we're going to talk about attorneys, and we're going to talk about finding a good FTC attorney and why if you find the wrong one, you're going to screw yourself. And I mean that with the most love I possibly can. I heard about someone. I'm not calling, by the way, if you're listening and I'm talking about you, I'm not calling you out. Please don't be upset. I just get passionate about this stuff sometimes. So I heard that somebody turned down our audit service, our compliance audit service that Greg and I run together, because they thought it was too expensive. And the exact quote words were, I guess, shopping it locally to other local FTC attorneys so that I could see if I can get it done cheaper. I'm paraphrasing. I heard it from someone else. And when I heard that, I just took a deep breath and I leaned back and I just thought, how do I get this point across to you that that is the worst freaking thing you could do without sounding partial and like I'm favoring what we're doing? Look, I was traveling recently and I was at an event, and it was a great event. It's a great brand, a great person, great everything behind this thing, and they do a superb job, and their customers love them, and I found them to be very compliant, but I saw things. I saw a few things right off the bat that apparently, and I can't vouch for this, apparently have been attorney approved. Now, I'm also a living proof of this fact. You have to have, look, I have representation. I still work with them that worked with me for years before, and I have nothing bad to say about them. But I will say this. Greg, who is here today, by the way, hey, Greg, what's up? Thanks for being back for the episode. Greg has been doing mostly compliance law for 20 years, and he closes and settles more cases per year, per week, per month than any other attorney I know. A lot of the advice that I have learned from Greg, this is the craziest thing, and I'm going to share this, and then we're going to bring Greg on, we're going to talk about this. So for example, our sales calls. I said, Greg, our sales calls are clean. I feel great about it. Let's go to court. I had a paralegal. My script was reviewed. We are good to go. I'm hiring you to do this big audit of my calls, and I'm going to throw it back at them, and ha, 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 ha. And Greg calls me after 5 calls, listening to 5 calls, and he's like, no go. There's violations here. There's court like this. This is not gonna be good in court. I said, what? So there's no way, man. I know. He says, you ask, what is your goal? So who the hell cares about that? Goal setting. I ain't ever heard anything about goal setting, and I'm out there Googling FTC goal setting rule. Nothing. Right? I'm like, well, so how the hell am I supposed to know about it? How does Greg know about it? Greg's like, oh, I was in the room during a thing when we were doing a thing with the FTC, and one of the FTC directors walks in and says this and tells me point blank to my face that this is a problem. And I sat back and I looked at that and I was like, oh shit, that's just experience. Like, how else do you learn that? And that's not the only thing. There have been many things. Now I've caught a disease from Greg, and that is I sit around at night sometimes and my joy reading is cases. I'm reading what cases they're settling, but he's been doing that for 20 years. So we're going to talk about, you don't have to hire Greg. You don't have to work with our audit service. That's okay. That's not what this is about. But we're going to talk today about how do you find the right attorney? Because I'm telling you, that family law attorney down the hall, down the street that charges $250 an hour, that says, oh yeah, I can do FTC, that's going to stay up at night and chat GPT the FTC Act and try to answer your questions. They just aren't going to be helping you. They're going to be hurting you. And I just mean that with full heart. So now that my rant's over, Greg, you probably see and hear this all the time. So talk to me about why. First of all, how many true compliance attorneys, Greg, do you think, yes, there are even in this country? Like at your level?
A dozen or so.
A
I mean, I
dozen.
work with some really good ones out in DC that represent some clients too. Not a lot. I was actually at dinner last night with a couple of clients, and I had that case that we've talked about. There's that class action case that I mentioned to you. So I had a client in December that got served with a class action lawsuit out of California, and they didn't hire my firm. They had insurance, which is always a good thing. If you've got like errors and omission insurance for that type of stuff, that's like a really good thing to have, because the insurance provider will come in and defend on those type of suits, and you're not coming out of pocket outside of a deductible. So the insurance company hired a big law firm out of LA to handle the litigation. And they wanted to talk to me because I identified the issue back in August when this client hired me. There was a 3-day right of rescission that they weren't giving over the telephone cells in California. And I said, well, there's a couple statutes that pertain to that, and you should do that. So they started giving that 3-day right. Well, unfortunately, a client that had purchased from them months before with the law firm filed a class action. So this large law firm out of LA calls me up, and they're like, "Hey, we're going to be the litigation defense on from the insurance companies just hired us on this, and we want to know whether this law really applies or not, and we want to know what you think about this." And I said, "Well, and so I identified a case for them to look at. And they said, "Oh yeah, we looked at this case. It was actually a case as a young attorney right out of law school that I actually represented on. I'm one of a handful of attorneys that have litigated what's called a seller assisted marketing plan litigation case in California. SAMPAC is what they call it." And so he was like, "You were the attorney on this case. This was the case we've been researching." And so I gave him all the backstory. In fact, I still had all the pleadings and all of our arguments and motions behind it. And so last night at dinner, we're talking about this with a client. I'm in Kansas City right now. I'm talking to this client I've represented for almost 20 years, and I've helped them kind of navigate a whole bunch of stuff. And I told them that I gave this big law firm out of LA. I basically gave them a roadmap of defense on this case. And they were like, "That's incredible that you would have been the one attorney that was a part of this." And I said, I litigated 23 cases like this when I was young, right out of law school, right out of clerking. I was way over my head, but I learned it so well early on. And that's what kind of put me on this path of compliance and regulatory actions. And I just dug into it. But here, the example, what you're asking for is that sometimes your local counsel or people, and they don't know. They want to go to people who have expertise in this type of stuff or have some sort of experience in it. So I'm here helping a large law firm that I didn't get hired for, helping them understand how the law actually works so they can try to defend this action. So the key that I'm trying to point out is that sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And you'll get a lot of attorneys that will step in. I know, Anik, you've mentioned it, and your counsel was great. It's
Yep.
just they had a broad practice. They dealt with a lot of things. Do you know what I've dealt with for the last 20 years? Specific marketing and advertising cases that deal with telemarketers and live seminar companies and VSLs and webcasts and all the things that information businesses out there that they do, whether they're social media posts or their YouTube videos or their email campaigns. I've dealt with all of that. So when you're looking to say, "Oh, I want to go with a local attorney to do this," well, I mean, that client is going with a local attorney mostly because the insurance is paying for it. This is a huge law firm, represents multi-million dollar companies, but they don't have a specific knowledge set that has to deal with this area. They have a generalized knowledge set that pertains to a lot of different business relationships. And they figure, well, I can become competent in it, which maybe over the time they can, but last point, and I'll let you talk. One of the hardships I have sometimes with my own staff and when I hire attorneys is that the learning curve of all the nuances in this field is very big. So it takes a long time to train and nurture to get the knowledge to teach them, because there are just little caveats. I mean, you and I know this because we'll talk about things and we're like, "I had no idea that had You had to do this and this and this. Why wouldn't have anybody said that? The calls and the goal setting, I had no idea. Like, because unless you know because you live in it,
Yeah.
you don't know. The 3-day right of rescission, his former counsel should have told him up like that, right? There's no reason they should have been offering that without that, but they were. They had counsel, they had attorneys. I know I've talked to them, and I was like, why weren't you advising this? It's hard to armchair quarterback, and I don't get mad at former counsel. The thing is that a lot of attorneys have a broad practice. They know very like overall brush strokes, but they don't know the fine-tuned details of what the law is. And that's difficult to find.
Yeah, and the analogy that I now have been using for people, which I think would make sense, is just, well, I mean, I lived through it. I went through a phase where I needed surgery. We mentioned this, I think, at the last podcast we were filming. I mentioned it. There was a time when I needed surgery, and I needed surgery on my intestines, like digestive system, and I had a surgeon who had done a small procedure on me in the past, who my own primary care was like, oh, he can handle that. But his exact title is on his card, it says general surgeon. So he can handle all kinds of surgery, apparently. Now, my case was pretty serious, and I was kind of had a bit of a pause on that. And my sister, who was in it was in medical school at the time, she comes in and she says, "Oh, heck no, you're getting a specialist." And I decided to look into it. And it turns out there are surgeons who only do surgery on like your intestines and stomach and just like all that area. A better example for people to understand is just like something's wrong with your brain. Do you want a general surgeon or do you want a brain surgeon? Do you want someone who's done all kinds of surgery, or do you want someone who's literally spent the last 20, 30 years only doing surgery on the brain?
Right.
And I think in that example, everyone's like, oh my God, yeah, duh. But it's not. By the way, I've had lawyers in my life for 20 plus years, guys, and I never really connected the dots. So now it's funny because I'm going through a specific issue that's, again, possibly going to become a legal issue. And now when I'm looking for representation for that issue, I'm not specifically even going into like, yeah, they've got to be this type of attorney, but now I want that attorney in the freaking city where I'm having the issue. I want to find a local, for this locality makes a difference. And I'm just being much more specific about it. And so one thing that I wanted to suggest and I wanted to talk about, Greg, is what questions can someone ask? So let's say they are right now talking to an attorney, and the attorney says, "Oh yeah, I do. I'm a FTC compliance attorney. I've been doing it for years." What are some things that you would encourage them to ask to figure out whether they're really the right expert?
When was the last time you settled a case with the FTC or handled an investigation?
It's a great question.
They say that they've never done that before, then don't. Now, I get it. Everybody's got to start somewhere, right? The first case that I did, I partnered up with a large law firm that actually represented the case, and I co-counseled them so I could learn how to do it. I didn't just jump into a federal regulatory action without any knowledge, right? These 23 lawsuits, I never did any of those cases by myself because, well, most of the time I needed local counsel and I wasn't licensed in the state, so I needed to have them anyway. And so I learned a ton by watching other attorneys. I did that as a clerk for the Nevada Supreme Court. I would watch oral arguments, and then I'd go and talk to my judge and talk to him about what things that they did well and what things they did poorly. And I learned. So I observed a lot before I took that first case. And then I knew beforehand when I took that first case what the pitfalls were. But I can tell you this, if you've got an attorney and they say they're an FTC attorney and they do regulatory issues and compliance issues, and they haven't negotiated or resolved concerns through an investigation, or they've litigated the case, they probably don't know the inner workings that they need to.
What about, I mean, how many cases is that of a concern? Like, maybe they just happen to have done a case 3 weeks ago, but what if that's the only case they've
Well,
ever done?
ask him what, just the follow-up question is, if they have done one, what case was it, if they'll share with you? And because if it's a case that's settled, like you and I know, like I'm dealing with 5 investigations right now, and I don't even mention who those companies are because it's attorney-client privilege. But for the ones that have been settled and it's public knowledge, I will discuss cases that are public knowledge because it's something that's already been filed. And
Yep.
so if it's something that's been settled and filed, then they should have no qualms in discussing the tenor of the case and what the strategies were used to try to settle that case, or kind of the pitfalls and some of the conflicts they had in negotiating the settlement or going through the discovery in the case or whatever it is. So if it's the first follow-up question I would have with them is, okay, if you have done that, would you mind sharing the case in which you represented on?
Mm.
Uh, so
Yeah, I would even go as far as I'll tell this story, and this is, I think, interesting because I learned a lot. So when I was out talking to attorneys, when you get your CID, it's the same thing. I think that just one doctor tells you that you need brain surgery. You really want someone opening up your brain without maybe getting a second, third opinion, just to really, really triple confirm that like that's absolutely necessary. So I just decided I wanted to learn. This is how I do things. Even right now I'm building a software. I like to immerse myself into it fully. I hire consultants, I pay them for their time, I learn so that I'm making good decisions. So I went out and I talked to multiple attorneys, and I quickly started figuring out. You could tell real quick who really understood the rules, right? One thing I thought was interesting is I would say, hey, so um, what can you tell me about such and such case? And I picked a case that was a big case in the FTC world. Like if you are a truly FTC attorney, there's no chance you haven't heard about that case because it was a big shindig. And if the answer I got back was, well, yeah, I know about that case. I'd have to revisit it. It's been a while just to remind myself of what they didn't know about the case. Like for me, it was like they didn't know about the case, right? The second thing is I found a couple of attorneys in the FTC compliance world specifically that were really, really good in specific categories, meaning they represented certain sectors. I found one that was really good at like the whole health and supplement side. Every case he was quoting to me that he had closed was coming from that space. I found another one who seemed to be very good in the financial side, but that wasn't my world. I was coming from a different category, and I needed to make sure that the person knew how to defend that category. And it became very relevant because, Greg, you'll remember I took a piece of advice I got from one attorney that was in the financial space,
sure.
and I said, well, Greg, they said I can do it this way. And you're like, I, I know exactly where you're going with this. It won't work in this vertical. Like that works there, it won't work here. Okay.
Sure.
So those are some additional questions. Guys, you got to ask more questions and don't be, and if they start getting, by the way, if they start getting edgy about it and they're getting uncomfortable, that in and of itself says a lot. So when I spoke to Greg the first time, I didn't even have to ask him. He was quoting cases, reciting cases, telling me. And the thing is, he knew the people in my industry. So I'd mention a name, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I know that person." And then mention another name, I know. Then I was like, "Okay, you really know my space." Right? Because I'm mentioning specific influencers in my space. There's no chance you would know them. They're not like household names. They're not Tony Robbins that everyone would recognize. So I would just tell everybody that if you drive down the street, there are not a lot of ad compliance attorneys, and I'm seeing some really bad advice being given to people, but the advice is being given for low cost. In the case of, now let's talk about what it costs, Greg, because um, I think people, I'm seeing it. You warned me and you said this is going to happen. It's frustrating for me because of how important it is, how I know how important it is, but people want to price shop their compliance. And it's just like, I don't think people understand that governmental lawsuit risk in your business is
Yeah.
the number one catastrophic risk you have beyond economic risk, beyond anything else. But yeah, so what is a good cost? What should someone be spending to make sure they're compliant and looking at it?
So I've had clients that one of the clients that I represented a long time ago, they used a large law firm back east to do some of their compliance regulatory work. Good law firm, really love the law firm to be honest, but there are different tiers. If for the high end stuff, you're going to pay. I do advertising reviews for clients that can run in the 20, 30, $40,000, and that sounds expensive. But the one review that this large law firm did was a 1 month review, and it wasn't even as more in depth than what I do. $250,000. And it wasn't just a singular client. I know several clients that paid $250,000. Now, a lot of you were like, holy cow, there's no way I'm paying $250,000. Well, the problem is, like I had a client on a Zoom chat this week talking about compliance. They've been running for 4 years, generate, I'm going to give a range because I don't want to give specifics, but say they've been generating between 20 to 40 million dollars a year. So they've got money, they're flush with it. They're happy to buy the private jets and the nice cars and the mansions and all that other stuff. 20, $40,000 for compliance review to do this? Are you kidding me? I mean, but you look into perspective. I mean, Onik, when we went through the investigation, there were moments where they were asking for everything you owned.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously we would never have settled for that because you would have just litigated the issue instead of just giving it over to them. But you know where they come from. I'm dealing with a regulatory case right now that we had trial over a year ago, that if the regulatory body is successful, they're trying to get $100 million from my clients. They don't have $100 million, which they would go after, and they've already threatened to be as aggressive as possible in collection of a judgment. And I'm fighting like a honey badger on the other side to try to get that, to stop them on this. So what I find with most clients is that they'll go and pay for the ad copy, they'll pay for the staff that they need to run it, they'll take the extra resources and they'll put it in their pocket, but they won't do anything for prevention. And then when that CID or that lawsuit hits, they're completely unprepared to provide a defense, to give them a position to be able to go into court and have some defenses to argue against the regulatory bodies. So that's all we're trying to do. Doing an ad review and stuff, that's not an absolute that you won't get sued. I mean, lightning does hit. The hope is that it's enough that keeps regulatory bodies from looking your direction in the first place. But the second part is, if they do by chance look your direction, you got all these defenses in place. Where when I look at these initial ad copy reviews, when clients reach out to me and they say, hey, look at this and this, I can spot a dozen issues from the beginning that I know regulatory bodies will, and that's for the best of the best, the marketers who think they're doing it right. So when I look at it, it's like costs of doing business. I think cost of doing business, good businessmen want to have good defenses and understanding what the rules and the law are and paying for that appropriately. Listen, I had a client come to me earlier this week and they said, hey, I know I can buy an LLC set up for $100 online. I was like, okay, what's the quality that you're going to get out of that? Go ahead and sign up to the service. Think about what I've done for you in the past. Tell me how that compares.
Yeah.
Completely
You,
different.
you get what you
Completely.
pay for.
You
You
get
get
what
what
you
you pay
pay.
for.
And
And
we're not the big firms. Sorry, I'm trying not to use the name of the large law firms. Um, we're not the big law firms. I'm not the big law firms, so I don't justify the cost and overhead that they have, so I don't charge that. So why do I charge less? Is it because the product's less? No. It's just because overhead's not as big. And
yeah.
I hit a demographic of clients, or we try to, that need the service but can't pay $250,000 for the service. So we actually are price point comparison really, really, this whole thing that we're doing is really, really
Yeah.
competitive. I mean, it's actually, to be honest, probably too low. We should be
Yeah.
charging more.
Here's what I spent, just so everyone understands. This is just my legal cost. In legal plus, then I had to hire a forensic company for the post suit. Probably little over $1 million is what I spent. That's not settlement. That's not opportunity cost. That's actual checks going out, including the forensic companies and all of the things. I might be, guys, it's ballparking. Okay, I don't have the math in front of me. Maybe it's 800 grand, whatever it is. It's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Here's something I also want to tell everybody. Here's what I was spending before the FTC ever came around. So irony is I was taking it very seriously, and I'll get to a point here. I had a full-time paralegal in my company, so you can imagine, not a cheap person. It's a pretty damn good salary, like really good salary. Okay, probably a little bit too much. And I was easily paying a law firm 60, 70K a year in spot checks, this and that, and calls and blah, blah, blah. I was paying them more, but I'm specifically talking about 60, 70 grand a year is probably what was related to, hey, compliance and FTC, and can you review our script, and can you do this? So it's probably spending well over 100 grand, well over, maybe close to 200 grand a year and I still got hit. Why? Because, well, although I had a paralegal in the company that was great. She could only work off of what she was being told, right, by the experts, and the experts were awesome. I still don't have no issue with that, but they were only experts to the level that they were experts. I mean, to what they have experienced, right? So, I'm
I
a
mean,
great copywriter and
you remember the conversations. We got in and talked about the AMG capital management case. They were like, oh, yeah, I heard about that. They didn't know
yeah.
anything about the change.
Well,
You know?
actually, there were times where I would take what you said. The first day you have a call with me, you said, Anik, they're not. You don't have to worry about the whole revenue, the 65 million. You only have to worry about their telesales. And I'm like, that doesn't sound right. I'm like, okay. And then I took that to a different attorney, and they're like, no, that's not what the case meant. Like, that's not true. You have to. And I kind of had that going the whole time, and I'm like, all right. And I just turns out, guess what? When the complaint comes in, it's only after the telesales. But you said it. You're like on the phone. You're like looking me dead in the eyes. You're like, I'm telling you point blank. You don't have to think about that amount. It's gone,
Don't
done.
worry about
That
this.
that confidence comes from the fact that you've been there in multiple conversations. You've read everything they put out. And you know people that you can confirm with. So I think I want to wrap this up by saying this, guys. It is the number one risk in your business. I have dealt with economic issues. I have dealt with employee issues. I have dealt with product issues, delivery issues. I have been near bankrupt multiple times, well, a couple times, because of those issues that you deal with all the time as an entrepreneur. Nothing, nothing got even remotely close to the catastrophic impact of a governmental investigation. That stuff puts pretty much everybody out of business or almost nearly kills the business. And so that's your number one risk. So if you are running a company, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your employees. Don't work with us. I don't care. Don't get our service. Don't get our audit service. Don't hire Greg. Greg will tell you he's plenty busy. But if you're going to hire someone else and you're shopping it, you already know where this is going. And you know that. And if you're making all kinds of excuses, and if you're that person that will spend $20K like this without even blinking an eye on something that is marketing or sales or advertising, or God forbid you'll spend $200K on a car, and you won't spend 30, 40, 50 grand on making sure your business is legit and your assets are protected, and I rest my case. I don't know what else to say. And and people will say, well, Anik, you're just trying to make a bunch of money from it. Really? Because I haven't made a damn dime yet from teaching compliance. I am genuinely out there trying to blow the horn because it was so, so traumatic. And for those who don't listen, I just don't know what to do with you. So don't shop it. Greg said there's probably a dozen countrywide that are like that good, that actually understand this law that well. And I promise you, none of them are charging you a couple hundred. It's just not. What's that old saying? I'll end with this, Greg. You know that plumber, you call the plumber because you have some issue, and he comes in, he charges you $300 to come in and fix it. He comes in, he looks around, he takes a hammer, hits one thing, it's fixed. He says, "For my $300," and you're like, "Seriously, you're gonna charge me $300 to swing a hammer?" And he goes, "No, I'm charging you $300 for the 20 years it took me to figure out where to hit with the hammer."
Right.
And it's
No,
like,
sure.
that is the right attorneys who know this stuff. They've been doing it for decades, and that's what you're paying for. And I wouldn't do it any other way. That's my personal suggestion. Take it from a guy who just went through the whole ringer, and I'll never do it any way different for anything in my life. So take this advice away. Even if you're hiring a marketing consultant, I teach this all the time. You're hiring an agency. You want to know if that agency is the right agency for you? The first question you ask them is, how many of this type of funnel have you done? When's the last time you scaled this type of funnel? I want to know who your clients are. The worst thing an agency can do to me always is say, "I'm sorry, we can't talk about anything. It's all protected under NDA." I'm like, click. I don't even bother with that, right? So get specific and get the right person on your side. Another minute left. Greg, closing words on this topic.
No, I mean, you get what you pay for in a lot of ways. And the problem is that the stick your head in the sand like an ostrich approach isn't going to work for you. Because if you just ignore it and just think, okay, we'll just pretend like everything is okay, we're just going to do business, and we don't need any sort of guidance on this, then what I've seen in my experience is kind of like what we talked before we started. You're going to have people that they try to self-correct it. They don't know what to do. And so
Mm,
they overcorrect it in a way that fails. And then they're
mm,
like, following the law sucks. We can't do it. Well, you didn't have any guidance to do it in the first place. It's like a
yeah,
marketer saying, well, marketing doesn't work because this campaign failed. Well, why did it fail? Well, because you have a bad product or you did something else. No,
mhm,
compliance works. You can market. There are marketing companies all over the place that market. They
yeah,
just have the right guidance and they have the right technique. But
yeah,
it does cost a little bit. You got to pay a little bit, but I'm not
yeah,
saying you pay hundreds and thousands of dollars up front every year for that, but allocate a part of your business model, just like I do. I pay insurance. I hire for things. I do things in my business model I wish I could save on, but I do anyway. And
yeah.
I do that because I know it helps me become a better business owner if I do
Yeah.
those things. And you should do the same.
Yeah, guys, I mean it. Please, like this is, and the other thing I will say is, um, what you will get from attorneys most is you'll get like, oh, this could be maybe possibly problematic. Look into it. That's
No,
a
I'll tell
very,
you, you're going to get sued
yeah.
if you don't say that. If you say that,
Well,
you're going to get sued.
yeah, but not just that. What I'm going is what I love about an attorney who has like Greg, who has that experience, who's done it for that many years, who's been in your space, in your like in your client, is then I say, okay, fine, Greg. Then what? How can I say it? What do I say? And Greg's able to come back and say, what about this? And 8 times out of 10, I'm like, oh, that works. Like that's fine. That still gets me my purpose. So, this was not a big commercial for Greg or for myself. It truly was coming out of my actual experience right now of talking to people. Please, please, please stop shopping it. Stop shopping it. Stop discount shopping it. This is not a flea market. It's the last thing you can do. If you get the discounted rate right now, you are going to pay the most later. That is, I promise that's going to happen. All right. So, with that said, everybody, we are conducting our free marketing assessment, so that's a perfect lead into the pitch. Go to naoac.com/audit. Again, the link in the YouTube is right below. Fill it out. If you're doing $500,000 a year or more in revenue, we'll go ahead and give you a free assessment, just kind of an overview, look at to see what we're doing. And then after that, we'll give you a custom proposal for an audit so that we can get in there and help you. All right, with that said, that's all I got for today. And by the way, the book, I don't know when this episode's coming out, but April 16th so far, we're sticking to it. That's the date. The book goes live. Get ready to buy a bunch of them. All right, don't just buy one. We're going to have a really cool deal for 1, 3, 10, 25. Buy more. Give them to your employees. Give them to your team members. Give them to people you love. All right? Greg, thanks as always, man. To the rest of you, when life pushes you, stand straight, smile, push the heck back. See you later.